Version 2.4 was quite the update for Genshin Impact. We got a new Archon quest, new and returning characters, adorable outfits, and a Lantern Rite festival people actually enjoyed it and complain about, I think. It's great, but nothing was as interesting as the Atlantis of Genshin Impact, the nether realm of sinners, Enkanomiya. It's always a grand old time whenever Mihoyo introduces another civilization that was yeeted into oblivion. I knew Enkanomiya would give us some deeper lore, but I was not expecting the information we got. And oh, is said information juicy. So in true Kingdom Hearts fashion, I hereby dub this video Part 1.5, the bridge between Part 1 and 2 of my Sun and Moon series. If you haven't seen Part 1, I highly encourage you to watch it before this one, as many of the topics I covered will be important for understanding the contents of this video. And there's a lot to cover. We're not gonna get to everything. And with version 2.5 now out, we're definitely gonna get some more lore about Enkanomiya, and I can't wait to see what they've got for us. But before we begin, travelers, remember that this is just a theory and speculation, nothing more. Come in with an open mind and we'll get along just fine. And as always, go and do some of your own research, you lazy bum.
No.
Oh, and don't watch this video if you care about spoilers concerning Enkanomiya and also Honkai Impact. With that out of the way, let's start talking about the incredibly sus origins of Teyvat and the so-called Primordial One, and end with a tree and a moment. The origin of heaven and earth is like the chicken and egg, so said Abrax, the great sage who made the Helios. We learned that Injo, the Abyss Lector in disguise, was looking for before sun and moon, because it proved the gods in Celestia do not come from Teyvat. Certainly a grand revelation, but is everything in the book true? Spoiler alert, probably not. I want to caution you from taking everything in this book at face value. There are quite a few red flags. Remember that this is written from the perspective of the Enkanomiyans, and it seems like they aren't sure about some of the details. I wouldn't expect them to be either, since they weren't present for a few portions of the story. Let's just start at the beginning, when the gods arrived and built their ark. According to Before Sun and Moon, during the period of when the doves held branches, the eternal throne of the heavens arrived with the Primordial One at its helm. Its name may have been Phanes, red flag, a being who had wings and a crown and was birthed from an egg. It created 4 shining shades of itself and waged war against the 7 sovereigns, rulers of the Vishops and of Teyvat. After 40 long years, the Primordial One and its shades emerged victorious, vanquishing the 7 sovereigns and subjugating their nations. Using the eggshell from which it emerged, the Primordial One separated the universe and the microcosm of the world, and thus the renovations of the Ark began. It took 400 years to make the mountains and rivers, and the seas and oceans which the Vishops had no choice but to flee to, and with the help of one of its shades, the Primordial One began filling the world with life. Birds of the air, beasts of the earth, fish of the sea, flowers and grass and trees, and finally humans, who were as numerous as the stars in the sky. False sky. These humans made a covenant with the Primordial One, and so the Ark was opened. Everything was gumdrops and rainbows, and it would stay that way so long as no one succumbed to temptation. Would be a shame if someone did that. Everything went to shit in the funerary year. A second throne of heaven came to challenge the first, and another war started. It was during this war that Enkanomiya fell into the sea, and well, that's the gist of it. Long story short, the Primordial One came to Teyvat, defeated the dragons, repurposed the continent for humanity, and then got into another war with someone else called the Second Who Came, the fallout of which was probably the Archon War, but we'll discuss that another time. It's highly likely the Primordial One and its shining shades got their asses kicked, though. The Enkanomiyans thought the Primordial One must have won, which doesn't make much sense. Why would they send the Enkanomiyans to the depths of the sea despite their covenant? Why would it and 3 of its shades ignore their prayers, but not the 4th? They wanted humanity to be happy, right? So why forsake them? I'll be honest, there are a lot of things that make me skeptical about this origin story and a ton of layers I want to get into. But for now, let's talk about the alleged Primordial One, Phanes. Phanes is a being that originates from Orphism, an ancient Greek religion. It centers around Dionysus, god of winemaking and fertility, who is an incarnation of Phanes. He is also equated with Mithras, a bull-slaying god associated with the sun, and Eros, otherwise known as Cupid, the god of love. Remember that. Like its Genshin counterpart, it's an androgynous deity born from a cosmic silver egg. This egg was created by Kronos, the personification of time, or Nyx, the personification of night, depending on your source. He has a helmet and golden wings, and is also entwined by a serpent named Ananke. Together with Kronos, her brother and lover, they encircled the universe as a snake and crushed the egg of Phanes, which resulted in the birth of him and, well, pretty much everything. Her power was so great that she was one of the only beings who was able to influence the decisions of the fates, much like Zeus is able to. She also happens to be frequently associated with the goddess of love, Aphrodite. Remember that. Ananke is very similar to the Ouroboros. And hey, look at that, how convenient. The Enkanomiyans worshipped what they called the imaginary serpent, Ouroboros. The Ouroboros is an ancient symbol represented by a snake or dragon that eats its own tail. You've probably heard of it. It's in a lot of artwork and mythologies around the world, like in Egypt, where there are tales of the god Mehen taking the form of a snake to protect god of the sun and life, Ra, on his journey to the underworld. Jormungandr in Nordic mythology is also an Ouroboros who circles the world tree. In Gnosticism, it represents the divine and earthly parts of man, as well as the soul of the world. The snake devours itself, constantly being reborn again and again, representing the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And it was an extremely popular symbol in alchemy. It was seen by alchemists as an obstacle to overcome on the road to achieving immortality, a gift granted by the Philosopher's Stone. You could say the Ouroboros is the ultimate symbol of time. It's also a symbol of fertility in some places. You know, the tail is and the mouth is okay, yeah, you get it. Phanes is light and life. He is a dying and rising god. He is the one who birthed the all, and he is the seed from which all mortals and gods arose. There have been several mentions of a person very similar to this Primordial One, scattered throughout the lore, including in the manga. At the end of the prologue, Aether asks Venti if ascending to Celestia makes you a god, and he responds by mentioning 3 different beings: Pangu, Purusha, and Ymir. Pangu is a Chinese primordial being who emerges from a cosmic egg and dies from having to keep an unstable heaven and earth separate. His corpse breathes life into the world, and his spirit becomes humanity. Purusha is a Hindu primordial being the gods sacrifice to create all life. It is the soul of the universe, the spirit that exists in everything at all times. And Ymir is the Norse ancestor of all giants. It was killed by Odin and his brothers Vili and Ve, and together they took its body parts and fashioned the earth. All 3 of these beings are just like Phanes, including the part concerning sacrifice. Remember how I said he's a dying and rising god?
No.
Well, there's an Orphic myth about him being murdered by the Titans. His limbs are boiled in a kettle and the Titans devour him. In retribution, Zeus hurls his thunderbolt at them and incinerates them, turning them into ash. Humanity is born from that ash with a body inherited from the Titans and a divine spark or soul from Phanes. Kinda the same theme as Gnosticism dualism, where humans have a divine origin and spark trapped within a mortal form. Anyway, Athena, goddess of wisdom, is able to salvage the dead god's heart, and with it, Zeus is able to recreate Phanes and bring him back to life. It's really this dying and rising theme that makes me think the Enkanomiyans got it wrong. This Phanes got screwed. Whoever's in Celestia now probably doesn't belong there and are the culprits of this murder mystery. But let's ignore that for now and talk about the Primordial One's shining shades. Who are they?
Don't know.
The most likely answer is Arya, Sonnet, and Canon. The Moon Sisters didn't change places in the sky for some reason, right? Which resulted in a bunch of calamities that laid ruin to the Hall of Stars and killed them. Allegedly. Perhaps this lines up with when the second Who Came arrived. The Enkanomiyan's prayers were not received by 3 shining shades. There are 3 sisters. Moons shine due to the light of the sun, and you can't answer prayers if you're dead. Probably. So assuming the 3 sisters are the shades, then the Year of Jubilee was probably the era of the Seelie? It kind of fits. Humanity did only have one culture, and the Seelie were said to inhabit all of Teyvat and the Dark Sea, which so far has been true. They're everywhere in Teyvat, even in Enkanomiya, a sealed-off island that sunk thousands of years ago. That's also why so many ruins across Teyvat have triquetra iconography. Hell, the figure surrounding the triquetra on these reliefs might even be a stylized version of the Seelie, but that's just me talking out of my ass again. This idea also fits nicely with Celestia's reasoning behind destroying civilizations. All the yeeted societies have had some connection to the sun or moon or both, so to suppress the truth, they wiped them out. No one remembers the Seelie or the sisters for a reason. Another thing, the Year of Jubilee sounds a lot like the era described in the Prayers artifact set when Celestia communicated directly with humanity and the envoys of the gods walked the earth. The Seelie were tasked with guiding humanity, so they definitely fit that bill. One more thing. Remember the KFC wings, the wings of feasting?
No.
The lore behind it actually tells the story of the 7 sovereigns. The narrator is Alice, who is telling this story to Klee in a very violent way. According to her, the dragons were eaten to extinction by humanity. Good old Alice, she knows just the right thing to say to a child. What I really wanted to point out was the color of this glider. Alice changed the color scheme to fit the colors of her family. The original colors were actually blue and white. You know, the color of the Seelie. Okay, so we have 3 of our potential shining shades and somewhat of a cohesive timeline to work with. Now let's talk about the 4th shade, the one who didn't abandon the Enkanomiyans, the God of Time. We learned a few names this elusive deity goes by, so let's dissect some of the important ones. One is the 1,000 Winds of Time. Funny, someone we know very well was also one of the 1,000 Winds and called upon its power when a certain dragon threatened Mondstadt. The other 2 names are Kairos, the Enkanomiyan name for her, and Istaroth, her true name. Kairos is an ancient Greek word that refers to a right, critical, or opportune moment of time to perform a certain action.
Get up on the Hydra's back!
However, in modern Greek, it is a way to refer to the weather. The name Istaroth is where things get saucy. As you all know, without exception, all of the gods in Genshin Impact have names that are exactly or slightly altered from demons in the Lesser Key of Solomon. Istaroth is very much the same. It likely originates from the demon Astaroth. He is described as a great duke of hell in the shape of a nude man with feathered wings, wearing a crown and holding a serpent. A somewhat similar description to Phanes, actually. He's part of an evil trinity consisting of himself, Beelzebub, and Lucifer. He teaches the mathematical sciences, can make men invisible, lead men to hidden treasures, and answers every question asked to him. Sounds very similar to a demon who happens to share a name with a certain emergency food. I'm also very interested in the can make men invisible part, but I'll share my thoughts on that another time. Oh, one more thing. Astaroth can give power over serpents to mortals. Isn't there a snake we talked about that I defined as the ultimate symbol of time?
No.
So what's with the eye they use in Istaroth? It likely comes from the Phoenician goddess Astaroth gets his name from, Astarte, whose Babylonian and Sumerian equivalents are respectively named Ishtar and Inanna. A lot of Aphrodite's mythology actually draws inspiration from them. Inanna was worshipped as a goddess of war, love, and fertility, and her brother was Utu, god of the sun and justice. Together with her brother, she was the enforcer of divine justice, the queen of heaven, and many of the myths surrounding her involve taking the domains of other deities. Interesting. She was also heavily associated with the planet Venus, otherwise known as, you guessed it, the morning star. Her main symbol, the Star of Inanna, looks like this. Her star could either have 6 points or 8 points. Most of the time you would probably see 8 points though. Funny, I feel like I've seen stylized versions of this all over the game. She was also associated with doves. In Before Sun and Moon, the period when the first throne of heaven arrives is called When the Doves Held Branches. Now hold that thought for a moment. Let's circle back to the God of Time and our sussy little baka, Paimon. Does all the new information about the God of Time support Paimon as either being the God of Time or someone heavily associated to her?
No. Wrong!
Remember how I said Inanna is a goddess of fertility?
No.
I said something similar about the triple goddesses in part 1, that they represented different stages of a woman's life cycle. Well, Paimon was directly paralleled with fertility in the game. During the world quest, the Sun Wheel and Mount Kanna, Pama shares a story that reminded him of the Traveler and Paimon that he'd heard from Sumida. This lady knows her stuff, by the way. If you're interested, why don't you go take a look at some of her lines? But anyway, the tale is of a god of fertility who dwells in wheat fields and travels around with a human. The human would be the Traveler, and Paimon would be the god of fertility in that parallel. The Traveler's often perceived as human, and Paimon's a literal floating child, so there you go. The wheat fields part in the tale is where things really start to connect. Enter Demeter, a Grecian goddess of fertility associated with wheat. It's one of her main symbols, but you know what else are? Snakes and turtle doves. Oh, and isn't it just silly that in the Orphic tradition, she's the mother of Hecate, one of the triple goddesses of the moon. Demeter also has several connections to Dionysus, one of them being that she is his grandmother in the Orphic tradition. He's even her son in some stories. And remember, Dionysus in the Orphic tradition is an incarnation of Phanes. And to really solidify that Istaroth probably takes a lot of inspiration from Demeter, let me read you a quote from the Golden Ass. Yes, no, that's literally what it's called. It is an ancient Roman novel by the philosopher Apuleius. This quote concerns Isis, the Egyptian equivalent of Demeter. Listen closely. I, mother of the universe, mistress of all the elements, firstborn of the ages, highest of the gods, queen of the shades, first of those who dwell in heaven, representing in one shape all gods and goddesses. My will controls the shining heights of heaven, the health-giving sea winds, and the mournful silences of hell. The entire world worships my single godhead in 1,000 shapes, with divers rites and under many a different name. Since Paimon was the one who led me down this rabbit hole, there is yet another connection between her and the God of Time. There's one more thing about Demeter that I wanted to mention. She happens to govern the eternal cycle of life and death. The ancient Athenians called the dead Demetrioi in reference to her power over that cycle. Their belief was that new life would sprout from a dead body, just like a plant that arises from a seed. Remember that. Wait a minute. Isn't there a certain statue somewhere in the game that represents someone trying to free humanity from the eternal cycle of life and death?
No.
A statue of an omnipresent god? Didn't I say the Ouroboros? The symbol of that same cycle is really the ultimate symbol of time. Isn't the God of Time Istaroth basically omnipresent, since she's literally described as every moment? And Istaroth is based off the demon Astaroth, which is in an evil trinity with Beelzebub, or should I say its alternate name, Beelzebul, which happens to be the name of the god who built this statue. And if memory serves me correct, Whale Milk said something about this statue looking like the blessing of the Welkin Moon. I'll put a link to that video in the description box below, and why don't you go subscribe to him if you haven't already? He's a quality theorist in the community. His recent iceberg videos are pretty good too, so go check those out. But anyway, point is, this is probably Istaroth. All this overlapping information is making me think that maybe the sisters, and another lady we'll talk about in a second, are just shades of the God of Time, different aspects of her. Together they make a single god of the moon, of time. Or she's like their mother? Demeter is considered a mother goddess, and Ananke is mother to the Fates. And we did talk about the Seelie, the Moon Sisters, and the God of Time and how they all intersect in part 1. So this idea isn't too far-fetched. All right, travelers, it's time to get serious. It's time to get focused. Wake up, Buttercup, and get your head in the game, because you're gonna need all the brain juice you can get for this next part. We're gonna combine everything we've learned in this video and put it to good use. We are entering a zone of high speculation, but if you're ready to go down this rabbit hole with me and fall all the way to Wonderland, take my hand and we'll jump together. No. You ready? Too bad, because I'm forcing you to come anyway. Whee! Let's talk about the parable of the tree. In the story, the king, the Primordial One, wants to cut down a tree with the most spiritual energy in his garden to repair the beams of his pavilion. However, his gardener is in love with the spirit of the tree. The king's priest, the God of Time, tells him to take some branches from the tree and plant them in the ground. The gardener says a spirit tree shall take 500 years to grow, which the God of Time responds with, "Your one thought shall echo through eternity." The gardener then plants the branches in his backyard, and a new tree instantly grows, with a new tree spirit that is a continuation of the past one. If I had to guess, the tree would refer to the ancient Irminsul tree. You know, the tree likely in the abyss, the parent tree of the smaller dead trees we get trash artifacts from. Help me, no. I've been in this domain for weeks to refine my Kazuha's artifacts and still don't have a decent f***ing piece. Its roots make up the ley line network of the world. It records everything that ever happened, and the artifacts we get from it tell us stories of the past. Now remember the time period when the doves held branches. That's where all the goddesses we've talked about come in. Each are symbolized by the dove. These goddesses represent Istaroth in-game, so let's change the wording a bit. How about when the sisters held branches of the Irminsul tree? Or even when Istaroth held branches of the Irminsul tree. Perhaps the sisters were guardians of the tree, a tree that records anything that ever happens, a tree that records moments in time. Maybe the God of Time and the sisters are the tree itself, and that's why Irminsuls have the power to preserve time to begin with, or even vice versa. The idea fits really well, and there might be some evidence of a relationship between the sisters, the God of Time, and the tree, other than what I just mentioned. Enter Venti, the sussy bard himself, the one who has plenty of connections to the Moon Sisters, Paimon, etc. We'll talk about all that in his video. But he was said to be born from the branches of time. This is likely a reference to Istaroth herself, as Venti has been described as a single thread of the 1,000 winds. Istaroth is the 1,000 winds of time, so there you go. But what if this is one of the many things in this game that has a double meaning? What if it literally means from one of her branches, that she's the whole damn Irminsul tree? Let's turn our attention to Dragonspine. The princess of Salvan Dagnir, one of the kingdoms destroyed by Celestia, was born under their Irminsul tree. She had the power to see the future. The princess herself is even referenced with the moon. Her people hoped her beauty and skill would be as eternal and pure as the moonlight. and all Irminsul trees are silver white or pale, descriptions the game has used several times to reference the moon. The ones we find are all petrified, but the trees are ultimately undying. They can be revitalized with resin, which happens to be shaped like a crescent moon. There's even a mural the princess painted that looks like it has a clock on it, and Roald the Adventurer would later write in his diary that Time had abandoned the mountain city. Time with a capital T, suggesting he's talking about a personification of time, the god of time. And you know what? The princess's last known vision was of Durin, which she and her people saw as a bad omen. After the Skyfrost nail drops, after it kills that tree, after she tries in vain to revive it by grafting a healthy branch onto it, she doesn't have visions anymore. Maybe the god of time couldn't help them anymore because Celestia severed their connection to her. Salvin Dagnir's Irminsul was clearly sentient, too. It had this to say when the traveler fully revives it as the frost-bearing tree and bestows him with the frost-bearer weapon. Here, for those who dwelt in my safe shadow, for the priests who eulogized me, for that lovely maiden who oft painted upon my form, for all the happiness they could not possess, I enjoin them all into this crimson icy fruit. To the one who can render recompense upon this poisonous world shall it go, and may they carry my innocent bitter fruit as they enact justice. Let's return our attention to the parable of the tree, shall we?
No.
Great! The gardener is in love with the tree spirit, right? Well, there is one love story I can think of that fits, and it also happens to involve someone deeply connected to the moon. The love story of the First Seelie and a traveler from afar, mentioned in Volume 4 of Records of Julian. They married in front of the Moon Sisters in the Lunar Palace, but disaster struck 30 days later, likely because the sisters did not change places in the sky. She and her lover tried to escape, but were unable to, and were punished with being separated from each other for eternity. Their memories were wiped without a trace. I talked about how the Seelie are related to the sisters in part 1, but I actually think the First Seelie was a moon sister herself. And I think that for several reasons that I'm not going to talk about in this video. But for the sake of this theory, let's go ahead and assume she was a moon sister or related to them, a shade or child of Istaroth, however you want to put it. I think she's the tree spirit, but let's add one more tiny layer of evidence just to be on the safe side. Remember Astarte, Ishtar, Inanna, and Aphrodite, these goddesses Istaroth takes inspiration from. They are all goddesses of love. That cannot be a coincidence. Now I turn your attention to the king's gardener, whose incarnation is not defined in the parable, the one who is in love with the tree spirit. There are two people who can fit this love story motif quite nicely, but only one of them might actually be the gardener in this story. The other one may fill a different shining role, one not mentioned in the parable at all, but he is inevitably tied to the tree spirit and the gardener nonetheless for several reasons we won't go into now. But humor me. Let's talk about bachelor number 1. If the tree spirit truly is the First Seelie, then it stands to reason her lover would be the traveler from afar. He was cursed, like his lover, and his memories were wiped without a trace. Well, isn't there a character we know whose memory has all but faded completely? Wasn't it mentioned on the official Genshin Impact Twitter that Dainsleif claims to have knowledge of fate itself? Doesn't the Irminsul tree whisper secrets of the past, and didn't I say the sisters, the First Seelie and Istaroth, might be guardians of the tree, or the whole damn tree itself? His title is Bough Keeper, which means branch keeper. His constellation was revealed on the Chinese Mihoyo forums to be Shuhuanzhou, Snake Ring Constellation. In other words, the Ouroboros, the ultimate symbol of time. And didn't Dainsleif mention something about saving some girl, after which the threads of all fate will be ethers to reweave? Why do you think Ether would be able to do that? You know, with the power of the sisters and Istaroth herself, one might be able to weave their own loom of fate. Wait, come to think of it, Phanes. God of Light and Life, Phanes, who is encircled by Ananke, one of the only beings capable of influencing the fates, the one who birthed him with her brother Kronos, who is time. His name means to shine or bring light. His name means Lucifer. And aren't there a couple other characters who represent Lucifer, the morning stars? And aren't those characters also referred to as travelers from afar? And they too seem to have plenty of time to spare. Didn't the sisters love to look upon the chamber of the morning stars? Didn't I say the First Seelie might be a sister herself, so how much do you want to bet she fell in love with a morning star? Dainsleif might be that morning star. Take a look at his pauldron and cape. There is a distinctive 3-diamond motif. Look at the Gnostic chorus. 3 diamonds surround that sky kingdom. And I'm pretty sure the idea of Dainsleif being the second heir has already been floating around for well over a year. I know I watched Teyvat Historia's video on it a while ago. I'm gonna provide the link for that video in the description box below, so go check it out if you want more context. And also subscribe to him if you haven't already. He's great. Also, I love his voice. I have a thing for voices, okay, sue me. There are a lot more things to connect Dainsleif to Celestia, but we're gonna talk about that in his video during the sun part of the series. But speaking of the sun, Celestia itself has often been identified with the sun. So if Dainsleif is from Celestia, you could consider him to be a sun who is surrounded by a snake that represents time and fate, which would make him exactly like Phanes. And you know what? Phanes is a dying and rising god that was murdered by the Titans. Dane literally means dead in Old Norse. And for those of you who are like, Onion, you fool! He's not dead. He's clearly alive. Well, it may not mean death in the way that you think. Enter the Fox Lady. Not that one. This one. The Kitsune Saigu. She had this to say in the Shimenawa's Reminiscence artifact set. Losing one's memory is no different from losing one's life. It is like death amidst darkness eternal. And remember that one of the personas of Phanes is Eros, god of love. I haven't played Honkai Impact, but I've watched a number of their animated shorts because it's no secret that Mihoyo uses a lot of the same themes across their games. I don't watch them for the specific plot. I'm not trying to make any connections between the game's stories. What I'm looking at is the symbolism. I watch them to see what I can learn, to see if there are any themes or patterns that are the same as in Genshin. And oh, do they hide some interesting Easter eggs in the most random of places. With that in mind, how convenient is it that Mihoyo recently released this video not long after Enkanomiya dropped in Genshin? It features Otto, a character who looks strikingly similar to Dainsleif. Otto is trying to save his lover Colin from her fated death, something he's spent 500 years trying to accomplish. After fighting a glorified Necrozma that had somehow found its way into the Mihoyoverse with the power of Jesus, Otto touches a white tree, the imaginary tree. The tree on which all Mihoyo verses lie, which includes Genshin's universe. It allows him to travel back in time and create an alternate timeline where Colin doesn't die. She looks rather similar to someone in Genshin that we know, doesn't she? Someone speculated to be related to the Moon Sisters and the God of Time. And hey, Colin looks a lot like Kiana because they're part of the same family, and Kiana happens to be the Hawaiian variant of Diana, goddess of the moon. None of this can be a coincidence. The timing for this video is too convenient, and Mihoyo has done something like this before in the past. Maybe I'm seeing things wrong. Somebody tell me. I am blind after all. If you haven't watched these animated shorts, why don't you take a closer look at them with the eyes of a Genshin player? Ask yourself these questions. What parallels can I draw between Honkai Impact and Genshin? And how can that inform us about the direction Mihoyo is taking Genshin's story? I'd also take a look at the descriptions of the videos as well. They can be very enlightening. Let me read the one from this video. How many crimes must he commit to save her from the depths of hell? How far must he go to find himself at the end of time? I hope Dainsleif's fate is a little different than Otto's. I hope he can reunite with his love, though I wonder what kinds of things he'll do to make that happen. Which leaves us with the identity of the new tree spirit, the continuation of the tree spirit who was cut down, the new life sprouting from a dead body, someone who doesn't have a lot of brain juice left, who isn't who she once was, the moon who had fallen into the sea and was fished out by a certain traveler after he was sealed away for 500 years, the one who bears both the sun, Celestia, and the moon, the Triquetra, on her design, a true primordial child, a child of time. The food we keep for emergencies. The one the game keeps telling us will one day leave us. The one who someday may need saving. And if she's the new tree spirit, then Venti might be the gardener. Remember that the gardener plants the branches of the tree in his backyard. Where do we find Paimon? Mondstadt, you know, Venti's backyard. And the word gardener could easily be replaced with Archon. After all, the Archons ultimately serve Celestia. There are many more reasons for why I think Venti is the gardener, but we'll talk about that in part 3. The video dedicated to Venti. Just keep in mind, for now, that he is not what he seems, and he's a lot older than you think. So who's the Primordial One?
Don't know.
Like I said, I don't think Phanes is. I'm leaning towards him being Dainsleif, and if Dainsleif is the second heir, then the second who came may in fact be him. Perhaps the Lunar Palace was the first throne of heaven, and Celestia came later, or maybe they were around at the same time. Either way, this origin story doesn't ring right. There's a lot missing, and I just get the strangest feeling this Primordial One may have been an extraterrestrial conqueror hell-bent on subjugating the cosmos to create the ultimate paradise free of darkness, but we'll open that can of worms in the sun part of the series. I want you to answer one question for me. What is the difference between humanity and the gods? Because if you really think about it, all the miracles the Primordial One and its shining shade accomplished, they could all theoretically be done with alchemy. The story of Genshin Impact gets clearer and muddier with every version release. With every question answered, it seems like more are waiting in the wings. The mysteries just continue to deepen. And I'll be honest, I'm here for it. While I couldn't go into everything I wanted to, Enkanomiya gave us the key to understanding some important plot points, and I want to keep building on what we've talked about so far. There are so many connections, references that all blend together. It can be hard to make sense of the direction Mihoyo is going in, and easy to get lost. And to be honest, I have more questions than answers, but by helping each other, we can figure it out. We're gonna go as deep as we can. Part 2 is on the horizon, and we'll be searching high and low for the answers we seek. Until then, travelers, think hard on what we've discussed. Go back and look at cutscenes. Go watch other people's theories and speculations. Share your own ideas with your friends and the community. And if you happen to find your way back here, let's talk about it. But for now, this is goodbye. Good luck on your pulls, regardless of who you're pulling for, and enjoy 2.5. And I'll see you on the other side of the moon.